I'm going to go ahead and say it. 49ers-Cowboys is the greatest rivalry of all time in NFL history. And we are about to see the next chapter. We're about to see this thing resurrect on Sunday right here in Dallas. Hello from what will be ground zero tomorrow of a titanic clash between the 49ers and the Cowboys. And one thing that the 49ers have done this week, and this has started with Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, is emphasize the history of this rivalry to their players, because most of them are too young to remember when this rivalry was in one of its heydays, and it's had multiple heydays, but obviously the most recent one was in the 1990s. And probably the only 49ers player truly old enough to remember that is Robbie Gould, the 39-year-old kicker. So there have been history lessons at the 49ers facility this week when they do their, film to protect the ball. It's a focus on no giveaways. It's all about the ball during these extra film sessions. The 49ers have mixed in clips of the old Cowboy rivalry from the 70s, from the 80s, and from the 90s to teach their players the tradition, to show them what's at stake in this game, because this rivalry has meant more than football. So this is my attempt to kind of convey some of that through a YouTube video. So I'm happy that you guys are here. I know that you're trying to pass some time before kickoff, but we can go from the 70s to the 80s to the 90s and then to the present day, link everything together and get really pumped up for the game tomorrow. On the screen right now, you have a shot from 1972. 49ers against the Cowboys in the regular season. That's Craig Morton at quarterback for Dallas. And a lot of people think that everything here starts with the catch 10 years later in January of 1982. But that's not the case. This started earlier. The Cowboys historically were the tormentors of the 49ers. And the primary two episodes of nightmares at the hands of the Cowboys came in the early 1970s. Now, the 49ers won this game against the Cowboys in the regular season in 1972. They won it by a score of 31-10. But the year prior, they had lost to Dallas in the NFC Championship game 14-3. And they were about to face the Cowboys again in the divisional playoffs of this very season. And that, my friends, is when disaster struck. This is a picture from that divisional round. The 49ers are doing okay in this picture. They're sacking Roger Staubach. You could see that they're at Candlestick Park. Those are the baseball seats down the first base line behind him that were always empty. And you may not recognize the turf, but that's because in the 49ers' first couple years at Candlestick, after they moved from Kezar in 71 and 72, they played on AstroTurf, not even field turf, old school AstroTurf. So in the divisional round, the 49ers were up 28-13 to the Cowboys. They were making fun of Dallas on the field. It was a situation where it looked like the 49ers had finally gotten the monkey off their backs. The team that had beaten them in NFC Championship the year before was ready to lose to them in the divisional playoffs the year after. Well, it wasn't meant to be. The Cowboys, who were in the midst of the most famous quarterback controversy of all time, their coach Tom Landry was deciding between Craig Morton and Roger Staubach, who's on the screen, decided to yank the starter, Craig Morton, put Staubach into the game in the second half. Eventually, a 28-13 49ers lead turned into a 30-28 Cowboys win. Staubach led 2 touchdown drives in the final 90 seconds. This was arguably the worst moment in 49ers franchise history. They lost by 2 points at Candlestick, and their franchise was sent into a tailspin over the course of the rest of the 1970s. We all know that Dallas had success over the course of the rest of the 1970s. So that's all context for what would happen next, for what is the most famous moment in NFL history. But that moment wouldn't come for another 10 years. That moment is not the snowman. That's an advertisement. That moment is right here. That moment is Dwight Clark making the catch, which I think indisputably is the most replayed event of league history. It's considered the most famous catch of league history, and it probably should be considered one of the most famous throws. And, it's really funny because at Dwight Clark's memorial service in 2018, Joe Montana had one of the eulogies. And Joe Montana pointed out that Dwight Clark would always go around teasing Joe. There's a reason why they call it the catch. and not the throw. And of course, those two guys were great friends, but it was also a great throw. They could have called it the throw too, because there were three guys in Joe Montana's face. He was backing away from pressure, sprint right option, fading away toward the sideline. He lofted one up to Dwight Clark, a throw that many people at the time thought was meant to just be a throwaway and go out of bounds. But Dwight Clark soared up to make the catch. The 49ers actually scored a touchdown earlier in the game on the same play, sprint right option, except Joe Montana went to Freddie Solomon, the primary read on the play. Clark was not the primary read on the play, but the defense dictated it, and Montana's legend was born. The 49ers went to their first Super Bowl after that. They ended up winning 5 over the course of the 80s and 90s. So this is the play that launched a dynasty. But the fact that it happened 10 years after the Cowboys had knocked the 49ers out of the playoffs in consecutive seasons was a very, very big deal. So this is a situation right now where you have the 49ers getting over the hump against the Dallas Cowboys. 1 second. Yeah. Housekeeping trying to come in here as we're doing the YouTube video on Dallas. That kind of threw me off track. Where were we? The catch. So the 49ers are in a position where they overcome Dallas in 1971 and 1972 with the catch in 1982. Beyond that, there is a lot of off the field adversity that is not overcome by this play, but this play shows how sports can transcend and football can transcend the gridiron. Consider the fact that the city of San Francisco went through hell in the 1970s. You had the People's Temple and the Jonestown Massacre, Jim Jones drinking the Kool-Aid, that whole, look it up. I'm not going to go into the deep history lesson about such morbid things. But between the Jonestown Massacre, of which, if you talk to anybody who lived in San Francisco at that time, they knew somebody who, either was in Jonestown who lost their lives in that tragedy, or they knew somebody who knew somebody. I mean, it was a very tight-knit community. San Francisco's always been a city of neighborhoods, had that community feel. And this that happened in the late 1970s was something that shook the city to its core. That happened within days. Only days separated it from the assassination of Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone at San Francisco City Hall. So the 1970s were a tumultuous time in America to begin with, but especially in the Bay Area, especially in the city of San Francisco, the end of the 70s were particularly hard for the city. And again, if you talk to anybody who lived in the city at the time, they will tell you how dark of a time it was in the Bay Area. Well, fast forward to January of 82, and consider the fact that, when all this was going down late in the 1970s, the 49ers were terrible. They hired Bill Walsh in 1979. The 49ers really came out of nowhere in that 1981 season, setting up the 1982 championship against the Cowboys. Dwight Clark and Joe Montana, rookies who had joined the team in 1979, they were maturing into clutch performers. And the 49ers went 13-3. They beat the Cowboys in the regular season, but then they got to this championship game, and of course it would be the Dallas Cowboys who they'd have to face again. And when the Cowboys stepped out onto that field at Candlestick Park, it reminded so many of these fans who had been through the past 10 years as 49ers fans, which were not pretty, with Dallas being the team that ripped out their hearts in the early 70s. And then obviously with all this off-field stuff going on in San Francisco, it kind of represented the final nemesis for the 49ers when they faced the Cowboys in that 1982 season. So it was a situation where when you read history books, and there's a great book called Season of the Witch, which is about the history of the city of San Francisco that goes through all of the stuff, the crazy dark history of the 1970s. This 49ers Cowboys game is considered really the climactic breakthrough for the city and for the Bay Area. In fact, Season of the Witch, it's by David Talbot, who's a great author. I wrote about this yesterday. Has the final chapter dedicated to the 49ers toppling the Cowboys with the catch. And the chapter's title is Playing Against God. mean, it doesn't get any more epic than that, right? And I mean, if you go to the 49ers museum and watch the video there, I think they do a great job kind of chronicling how big of a deal this was off the field. You can see that this was bigger than just football. And John Lynch, when he was talking about imprinting the values and the history of this rivalry on 49ers players, the younger guys this week, he said, not only is this a playoff game, this rivalry is as good as it gets. And a lot of it is because of that backdrop. So you had Dwight Clark make this play. And then you had the community absolutely explode. At Dwight Clark's funeral, the Reverend Earl A. Smith Sr. said this: the day the catch was made, just the emotion, what it did for those kids in Hunters Point and in the Bayview neighborhoods, that's something I'll never forget. I remember walking back to the house. The streets were just full of people celebrating. It was a party in the streets as these kids realized that for the rest of their lives, they were going to have this moment to remember. I mean, that was powerful stuff. And I live to document the moments that sports have that impact the community in ways that are greater than just X's and O's. And I think the catch was all about that. And obviously it impacted the X's and O's. It launched the 49ers to become the team of the decade. And the Cowboys fell off in the 1980s, right? They turned into a 1-15 team by the end of the decade. But then Jimmy Johnson came in and he made the famous Herschel Walker trade, and he got a ton of draft capital out of that. And he rebuilt the team while the 49ers were winning Super Bowls. And he rebuilt the team to the level that the Cowboys ended the 49ers run of Super Bowl dominance in the early 1990s. And it turned into another phase of this rivalry. Now, this picture is from 1995 or beyond because Deion Sanders is already on the Dallas Cowboys. But the point remains the same. This was seismic. And today is the 27th anniversary of the most star-studded game in NFL history. So for this, we can have a listen in to Pat Summerall.
In 2 weeks, the Super Bowl will be played. After that, the Pro Bowl. Today, we'll play both. Their paths crossed once already this season, with the 49ers getting the best of the Cowboys. But Dallas only...
In 2 weeks, the Super Bowl will be played. After that, the Pro Bowl. Today, we'll play both. That was 27 years ago today. The 49ers and the Cowboys, in what I said was the most star-studded NFC or NFL game of all time, were able to get over the hump. Steve Young here diving over the goal line for what many consider to be the ceiling touchdown of that game. It was a nail-biter. It was titanic. It's hard to find adjectives to describe this game, but no game in NFL history has featured more combined star power than that playoff installment of Cowboys 49ers. 21 Pro Bowlers, 19 All-Pros, and 10 future Hall of Famers graced Candlestick Park's muddy field that afternoon. You had the NFL's all-time leading rusher, Emmitt Smith, and the all-time leading receiver, Jerry Rice, also on the field at the same time. So that happened. The 49ers beat the Cowboys, but as history has dictated, they couldn't be victorious over Dallas until they had been on the receiving end of some torture, of some torment. And the Cowboys definitely tormented the 49ers in 1992 and 1993. Charles Haley is a big name in the history of this rivalry. He was with the 49ers in the late 80s and early 90s as they won another couple Super Bowls, right? The 88 and 89 Super Bowls. He's a Hall of Fame pass rusher, one of the greatest at that position of all time. I talked about Jimmy Johnson trading his way to get Dallas back to the top. Well, the trade that put them over the 49ers was the trade for Charles Haley, a trade that Eddie Bartolo Jr., former 49ers owner, still deeply, deeply regrets. This shifted the balance of power in the NFC. The 49ers felt they couldn't deal with Charles Haley anymore, who had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It was creating a ruckus in the locker room. In fact, in 1991, after the 49ers had lost to the Los Angeles Raiders, at the LA Memorial Coliseum, Charles Haley punched a glass door, a swinging glass door, and broke the glass and had blood all over his hand, just as he was berating Steve Young for what he perceived to be fault for the loss. The 49ers lost the Raiders something like 9-3. I think they only kicked field goals on that day. So Haley was becoming a problem for the 49ers in the locker room. And George Seifert didn't want to deal with it anymore. So the 49ers ended up trading Haley to the Dallas Cowboys. And they didn't trade him for all too much. Jimmy Johnson felt that he could work with that talent, and work with the talent he did. The Cowboys in 1992 surged past the 49ers, beat them in the NFC Championship game at Candlestick Park. That's Emmitt Smith after that game. And the 49ers simply in 1992 and then the subsequent year in 1993 when they lost to Dallas here in Texas, they didn't have the talent at cornerback to keep up with Michael Irvin and Alvin Harper, two big, physical, fast Cowboys wide receivers. So Troy Aikman would light the 49ers up. So in 1994, the 49ers figured they had to somehow, some way spruce up and get better. So they got this guy, Deion Sanders. They signed him as a free agent from the Atlanta Falcons. The New Orleans Saints weren't happy because they offered Deion Sanders more money. But Deion, at that time, he was more into his legacy than he was the money. The next year, he'd be more into the money than the legacy. But Deion Sanders decided to play for $1.2 million. An all-pro cornerback playing for that little, that's wild. Now, Kyle Shanahan was a ball boy on this team. He still remembers it well. I think he might have even had a Deion Sanders jersey. But Sanders was one of the big differences between 1992, 93, and 94 for the 49ers when they finally beat the Cowboys. They needed somebody who could cover Harper and Irvin. The play that you see here was very disputed. The Cowboys thought it should be pass interference. The officials didn't call it PI. 49ers held on for the 38-28 win. And of course, Steve Young got the monkey off his back. Another addition for the 49ers was Ken Norton Jr. Now, he came straight from Dallas. So what you saw was a arms race between the 49ers and the Cowboys. And this happened at the start of two things. The start of free agency in the NFL, the start of the salary cap, and I guess three things. The start of Fox's broadcasting rights in the National Football League. So Pat Summerall and John Madden had moved over to Fox for that 1994 season. And you could bet that Fox, which paid Madden more than any player at the time to call their games, was thrilled to have 49ers Cowboys, such an epic matchup on their network because it was so watched and it made them so much money. So it really instantaneously gave Fox, which was a brand new network, credibility in the NFL broadcasting sphere because nobody knew what was going to happen. And Fox was only a few years old at the time as a network. People thought that, oh God, I mean, these are the new kids on the block. We're used to CBS, NBC calling these NFL games. Is it going to look tacky on Fox? What's going to happen? Well, you have the iconic NFL on Fox Music now that has survived 3 decades, right? You have all this name power with Fox. I mean, it just feels like a huge NFC game. It's too bad that CBS is calling the 49ers Cowboys game on Sunday because I think it should be on Fox. And it's too bad that Pat Summerall and John Madden are no longer with us because I think they would be perfect to call this game. But this game, 49ers Cowboys, gave that network, gave Fox its legitimacy. And it kicked off the salary cap era because the 49ers, to load up, at one point in that 94 offseason, had only $432 of salary cap space. They, A, had to get Deion Sanders to come at a discount to fit him into the salary cap situation. But B, they had to restructure players during this time. And this is something that's been adopted by the rest of the league since to fit under the salary cap. Eddie DeBartolo Jr. had to ask his dad for $10 million in cash so he could give guys signing bonuses. So that way the salary cap hit would be spread out over future years. Now, that eventually put the 49ers into cap hell. So literally beating the Cowboys is what drove the 49ers franchise into extinction. Not the franchise, the 49ers dynasty into extinction over the next several years. They finally fell off a cliff in 1999. But the 49ers were willing to do anything to beat Dallas. So they restructured these deals. They literally pulled players off the practice field wearing full pads. You had Brent Jones go into the front office, into the GM's office wearing pads, salt on his cleats, dirt on his pants from practice, and he would sign his restructured contract so the 49ers could sit under the salary cap. I mean, these were wild, wild times. And the 49ers ultimately got it done in the highest stakes environment possible. Carmen Policy, the GM, said, if we lose to Dallas, we die. That was his quote. If we lose to Dallas, we die. Now, you just think about the ramifications of what a third straight loss to Dallas would have meant in January of 1995. And I mean, it's almost frightening to think. Everything would have changed. The 49ers might have cleaned house everywhere, but instead they won, and they won that most recent Super Bowl. Carmen Policy had some great, great quotes about the rivalry with Dallas. It was stressful as can be, but it was so much fun. The stuff that would come out of both cities that would just stoke it, make it hotter, make it more titillating. It was a whole different type of rivalry. It truly was. It was the epitome of memorable opportunities and disappointments. You really did feel alive. It was just awesome stuff. Now, the Packers and the 49ers became the new 49ers rivalry in the 1990s, the year after, because it was the Packers who beat San Francisco in 1995. It prevented 49ers-Cowboys Part 4. So we haven't seen the 49ers and the Cowboys play in the playoffs since. So that's why tomorrow's game is so historically significant. We have seen this since then. That's Terrell Owens on the star. But obviously, we won't see this. Where is it? This one right here ever again. This is what the future will be, though. 49ers-Cowboys, an old school playoff rivalry. 10 observations and our predictions right now up on The Athletic. So I hope you guys enjoyed the trip down memory lane. Research this stuff. Watch the YouTube videos. This is just an introduction from me. It's really worth it to get some background on 49ers-Cowboys before we head into the main event tomorrow in the wild card round. I have other previews up talking specifically about the game. I'm going to come on live again here in just a little bit before these AFC wild card games happen on this Saturday. And I'm going to talk more specifically about this matchup, about Nick Bosa, and maybe even hold a full-scale Q&A for you guys so we can talk about this. But this is for the history. This is to set the scene. I hope you all enjoyed this. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll talk to you all soon. Thanks, guys.